Hello, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning on creative problem solving. It's very nice to see so many of you here have joined us today. Thank you so much. We're looking forward with my colleague, Zach Curtis, to sharing our knowledge, our insight that we've gathered at the Innovation Beehive over the last 10 years now in helping creative problem solve for our clients. I'm Mark O'Keefe. I'm the founder of the Innovation Beehive, originally a background in buying and then moved into human resources, joined the dark side of consulting, working both in the UK, USA, and Australia before coming back to the United Kingdom and founding the Innovation Beehive 10 years ago to accelerate the potential of individuals, of leaders, and of organizations. And I'm joined here this morning by my colleague, Zach. Zach, do you want to introduce yourself and say what your role is?
Yes, hi everyone. My role at the Innovation Beehive is Capability Director. That means it's my job to give people the tools and also the motivation to try and want to make some change in their lives, usually in the realms of innovation, culture, and leadership. And my background is in HR, learning and development, and recruitment.
Super. And we're blessed in the Innovation Beehive to have a whole range of clients from lots of different sectors there. And it's great actually this morning to see a couple of clients on the call with us. So lovely to see you again, and I hope you get some new learning out of this. So I'm going to hand over to Zach now, who's going to go through the agenda of what we'll be talking on our webinar.
Great, thanks, Mark. So we've got some amazing news for you all, and that first bit of amazing news is this webinar, although it's a webinar, will be quite interactive. So we will be asking you for your input on the chat function and on polls. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, or possibly for some of you at the top of your screen, you'll see the chat box. I'm sure we're all familiar with Zoom by now, but do feel free to interact with us all via the chat, and there'll be some specific moments when we have to do that. So what else are we going to be doing today? Well, firstly, we're going to be looking at what creative problem solving actually means. We're going to be looking at areas for creative problem solving. So what parts of your world can you actually begin to solve problems creatively? We'll be looking at the way that we think and particular behaviors in order for us to innovate and solve problems creatively. We'll be looking at a particular method that you can take away and use to solve problems creatively. And we'll be giving you more information about where to go for help. So we should probably dive straight in, Mark, and think about what creative problem solving actually is. Now, this is one of those moments where you're going to need to interact with us in the chat function. But before you do, just take a moment to think about if you had to describe creative problem solving to someone else, what would that definition be of creative problem solving? So see if you can define it down to 1 or 2 sentences in the chat function, and we'll just run through a few of them.
So Stephen Roberts, finding the awesome solution that blows everything else out of the park. I love that as a motivation or an inspiring first start. Miriam, thinking outside the box to come up with solutions that are not the obvious and absolutely differentiated solutions, not the obvious, not where you'd first go to for an answer. Richard,
and Mark,
I like
Richard's
novel and useful, really important. So often innovation or creative problem solving gets a bad rap because it's not implementation or useful. Thinking outside the box from Temi there. Alan, solving problems by seeing things that others miss, absolutely gathering insights into that. We'll talk about that. Diana, developing strategies which transform the status quo. Leslie, looking for solutions to issues that may present themselves when the usual action is not enough, and we're certainly finding that at the moment. Jane, being still, drawing upon the obvious as well as the unexpected, like all the elements coming in. And then Louisa, searching for an original, unknown solution to a problem. And Peter, scoping pragmatic, affordable solutions. Wow, great. Some fantastic examples coming through there, people's definitions of creative problem solving. And now we're obviously delivering this during the COVID-19 pandemic. And more we believe that creative problem solving is the role and responsibility of everyone in the organization. We are all coming up against challenges on a daily basis. All of those unknown unknowns are coming up towards us. And a way to help guide through and come to some great solutions is creative problem solving. But for that, you need to have ideas. And I'm going to hand back to Zach to talk a little bit about that.
Great, thanks, Mark. So there's an important thing to add to that previous slide, which is creative problem solving. It isn't something that you just do once and let go. It's not something that you do on a Thursday morning between 9:30 and 10:30. It's a continual process. It's something which becomes part of your mindset and the way that you look at the world from a day-to-day point of view. We should probably look at some of the areas that we can creative problem solve around. Mock, if you could take us through that would be
Yeah,
great.
I think what's interesting actually, when you think about creative problem solving or innovation, often people go straight into product. They think that is the obvious home for creative problem solving or innovation. And actually, you know, you can get absolutely new products, and we've worked on new products, some of which I'm proud to see on gondola ends in supermarkets or on the menu boards in restaurant chains. Absolutely, product is somewhere where an area where creative problem solving can be useful, but also looking at internal business processes, looking at your human resources processes, and also looking at your experience, whether it's your employee experience or whether it's your customer experience. Actually, there are at least 3 areas here: business processing, product, and experience, for which creative problem solving can be useful. Now, Zach said we're going to have a bit of interaction during this session, so we're going to launch a poll. Which areas have you used creative problem solving for in the past? Have you primarily used it for business processes internally? Have you primarily used it for product? Or have you primarily used it for coming up with new experiences? Or maybe something else, other? And do tell us about that in the chat. So we've got some votes coming in, that's lovely. We'll give it another sort of 30 or 40 seconds for people to vote. It is multiple choice. So either business process, product, experience, or other. So I've got a lovely one here from Angela. Other, how to motivate my daughter to do her homeschool work. Well, I think we're all experiencing some of that. I've been doing long division via Zoom with my nieces, and I don't know who needs more motivation, them or me. Jane, to make existing systems and structures meet new needs. Yep, absolutely. Well, I think we've had a decent share of the poll. Diana, creating entirely new propositions, brands, businesses, industries, and markets. And then Colin, all of them, plus culture, team interactions, and social dynamics. Yes, absolutely. Zach mentioned that a key part of the Innovation Beehive is about helping organizations deliberately develop their culture. And we use the process of design thinking and creative problem solving to help do that. So I'm going to now end the poll. And through the wonder of technology, I'm going to share the results. So you can see there, it's a bit of a tie in terms of where we are. We have a lot of people use it for business processes, a lot of people use it for product, less for experience, and 4 other people said that they use it for something else in the business, which we have discussed there. So we've got Leslie also just saying, I am other. In today's environment, we had an incredible business challenge as we are aligned to the airline industry. We did not sit back and wait on this recovering. We looked at other ways to run our business and support our customers and businesses. And I know, Leslie, we've talked a little bit about that. So you really have pivoted and found out new sources of revenue, new ways of offering products and services to your clients as well. And Jane talks about and utilizing research and shaping culture and practices. Absolutely. And we're working on a project right now, which is about doing the insight phase to understand cultures and organizations. But before we burst into that, I'm going to hand back to Zach, who's going to talk a little bit about the way our minds work and how that impacts on creative problem solving.
Thanks, Mark. There's a really interesting thing to think about. I wonder if you could all just have a think about people in your own lives. It might be a partner, a child, a business colleague, perhaps a friend. They go about seeing your challenge, slightly your problem, differently from you, the challenge you're facing. And that's because they view the world differently. They have different ways of dealing with things. They have different ways of understanding what it is that you may be going through or seeing. You could probably think of somebody who actually is better at particular tasks in the world than you. Perhaps it's coming up with creative drawings, or perhaps it's dealing with numbers, or perhaps they're more intuitive, linked to their emotions, or making lists and plans and so on. And that's going to impact the way that they ideate and solve problems. There's also some environmental stresses which might impact the way that they solve those problems. And they're all things that we need to really understand in order to be creative when we come to ideating. there's a couple of key points to bear in mind. The first thing is an understanding of ourselves and how we like to solve problems. The second thing is a thorough understanding of what the problem actually is, understanding the total landscape that that problem sits in. And of course, the third thing, and very important, is to have a clear methodology which will help us unify our approach and maximize the output, regardless of how we previously approached problems. Now, I think it would be really great if we could perhaps just use the chat function quickly for a moment, and just type into the chat function what you think are some of the barriers to solving problems creatively. Why is it hard to solve problems creatively? If you just type into the chat function some of your reasons, that would be great. And there's going to be, just while you're typing those out, there's going to be a number of different things. There's going to be some environmental factors. There may be some budgetary issues. It might be a mindset thing. It might be a lack of understanding of expectations between you and the person whose problem you're solving. It could be something completely different, but we'd love to hear.
We've got some answers coming through, actually. Zach, we've got fear of failure and risk. We've got past experience and resources, lots of unconscious implicit norms. Absolutely, that plays into culture and behaviors. We've got instant solution culture and mindset. I want it now. I want the solution. Absolutely. I don't want to spend time testing it. I want it to launch it immediately. Fatigue, organizational or individuals fatigue around this topic. Time. Sometimes people want the solution right now. Different expectations. We've got organizational dogma. We've always done it this way, so we're not necessarily wanting to change. And being creative is discouraged after children get to a certain age, so people are just not used to being creative. Absolutely, you know, suddenly we have to grow up and stop being creative. Many people solve problems by looking back and using past experience. Yeah, absolutely, we've got that in there. And a competitive organization rather than a collaborative one. Again, a lot of this is coming out in terms of how we behave and the culture in which we are sitting. So great, thank you very much for sharing that.
Really great range of things there. And it's great to see that there isn't actually one set of challenges that we're facing, barriers that we're facing to solve problems. I'd love to have a little fun exercise, which again will involve the chat function. And it's just to answer this question. So what is half of 13? If you could answer that, please, in the chat function, that would be great.
Got lots of different answers coming through.
We've got some great answers. Yeah, so I can see we've got, keep them coming. I can see we've got 6.5. I can see we've got thir, T-H-I-R. We've got teen, T-W-E-N. We've got 1, and we've got 3. We've got 12 T6, which I actually haven't seen before. I quite like that. 6 remainder 1. Yes, very good. Mock, if you could, we could have the next slide, just the 1, that would be great. So yeah, the majority of answers coming through is 6.5, which of course is the answer we very often get, because it's the one which most of us will go to first. And it's been absolutely wonderful to see a little bit of difference coming through in the chat, which is also normal, but it's not normally the majority. Mock, next one, please. Because there is a whole range of potential, or half a baker's dozen, or 50%, or teen, or thir, or 13 split in half diagonally or horizontally. Now, the point of this exercise is that a lot of us are very quick to jump straight into what the obvious answer might be, the obvious solution. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the only right solution, or potentially even the best solution, depending on the landscape of the problem that we're facing. And it's super important that we stop and take time to think about that, so that we start to adapt our behaviors in the best possible way to come out with the most creative solution to the problem. And Mock will actually take us through a couple more of the behaviors we need in order to solve problems creatively.
Thanks very much. So over the last, as someone at Google described it, decades, rather unflashingly, but in the last decades working in this space of innovation and creative problem solving, we've identified and experienced 4 really key behaviors that we think help you to think differently and not automatically go to the idea that 13, half of 13 is 6.5, but look as we said right at the beginning, for different answers, for new innovative answers that no one else has thought of before. The first behavior, I'm cheating a bit, is two behaviors actually. It's about being expansive and being reductive. If you imagine creative problem solving a bit like a funnel, right at the top of the funnel, you're saying what could be possible? What if we were to do it this way? You're thinking really expansively and deliberately behaving in a way that makes you think differently from how you've thought about this particular problem before. It helps you try and get over the idea of cultural norms, what's expected, go to new places, and therefore have new and different ideas. But ultimately, again, we talked about this in the chat, ideas have to be implemented. So you have to move down the funnel of creative problem solving to be more reductive, to start judging your ideas and get to a point where something can be tested after it's created as a prototype. So we'll talk a little bit more about that process later on. But these two behaviors, expansion and reductive thinking, are vital to the creative problem solving. They can't operate at the same time. You can't have a room where half of the people are being expansive and half of the people are being reductive, because reductive people always win. It's always easier to say no, we tried that before, or that won't work. You have to signal the second behavior to everyone, whether you're in expansive mode today or whether you're in reductive mode, so everyone can behave in the same way and either be thinking about what could be possible or thinking of all the reasons why something couldn't work or how you'd get it to work. The key thing to creative problem solving is coming at it with fresh eyes. In the chat earlier on, we heard about the idea that kind of our creativity and our different ways of thinking is almost schooled out of us. By the time we leave school, we're suddenly grown ups and we have to stop being creative. But the most creative people in the world, I think, are children, because they come to a problem with fresh eyes, because so many times they're experiencing something anew. So that fresh-eyed thinking is what we want to capture when we're creative problem solving. And then the fourth behavior of creative problem solving is what the late, great Clayton Christensen called connected thinking. This is about taking seemingly disparate spots, knitting them together, all of the insights, all of the information, all of the data that you gather as you're starting to be expansive and thinking about the world and the context in which your problem sits, and knitting those pieces of information together to become reductive and come up with a new and different ideas. And you know, someone we love at the Innovation Beehive, Edward de Bono, he's very well known for his 6 hats. He's also not so well known for talking about the behaviors that you need to jump out of what he calls your rivers of thinking. He says creativity involves breaking out of established patterns in order to look at things in a different way. Because if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. If you behave as you've always behaved, you'll come up with the same idea, or at best, the same idea as your competition. So we want to help you think differently and come up with new ideas, whether it's how to overcome wellness challenges in COVID-19 or launch that new amazing brand, product, or experience for your customers. So I'm going to hand back to Zach, who's going to start talking you through the methodology for problem solving.
Thanks, Mark. Now, I know, lovely listeners, what you're thinking. You're thinking, this is wonderful, but we've got so many different ways of approaching coming up with creative ideas to solve problems, and we've all got different barriers that we're facing. If only there was some sort of methodology to help us. But of course there is. In fact, there's lots. But we have one particular one which we love. Mark mentioned Google earlier on, and Google has 9 notions of creativity, and number 7 is creativity loves constraint. And constraint is important. Why? Because it actually helps to set the expectations, whether you're ideating and coming up with creative problems alone or in groups, which means then that you have a framework to help you leverage creative ideas, even if you have slightly different expectations or ways of working. It helps you work better together, and it helps you come up with really creative solutions. So if we can have the next slide, Mark. And it is a 5-stage method. It may be familiar to some of you. Let's call it a 5+1 stage method. It consists of those 5 stages you see in front of you: discover, define, ideate, prototype, and test. It is founded on design thinking, which was developed by IDEO. It's a human-centric process, which means it keeps the end user in mind at all times. And that's important because by keeping the end user in mind, it means that we come up with a solution which is creative for the people who will be using it. So they're more likely to buy into it, more likely to adopt it, and then more likely it's going to make a difference in their lives day to day. This methodology it's almost like it's breathing. It's both expansive and reductive, meaning there are moments in each stage when we'll need to be as expansive in the way that we think and the way we approach the stage as possible. There are moments when we'll need to be reductive, when we need to narrow down and boil down to some very key things, themes, or tools. The first step, discover, is all about uncovering insights. It's all about really understanding the landscape of the problem you're facing. And by understanding the landscape, you start to see the right path through. That path is define. That's where we really start to begin to draw out the key themes, the key needs of the original challenge. Ideate is an expansive phase. That's where we come up with a range of ideas, and breadth is really important here. Prototype is where we start to narrow down and build out what we believe will be a great solution that we take forward to test. And Mark will just take us through, actually, how we start to gather some important insights.
Yeah, and as Zach said, in this 5+1 methodology, you can see there, as you start off at the beginning, you're incredibly expansive. And as you move through, discover and define, you're staying expansive. Expansive in discover, slightly getting more reductive in define, expansive again in ideate before getting reductive in prototype and test. And then the +1 there, scale, you actually, as well as creativity, loving constraint, it loves to be implemented as well. But going back to the discovery phase, just a little bit about insights. And I know Zach has gone through some of that in detail, but we would describe insights as kind of a universal truth about the problem that you're trying to solve. It's almost like finding out some pieces of data and information, hooks that you can hang your idea hat on. They are really important because what we often do when we go to a challenge is we bring our assumed assumptions, we bring our unconscious bias, we bring what we already know or believe to be true about that particular problem. By going out and discovering and gathering insights from end users, from people who reject your particular problem, people who've got different experiences of your problem, looking what's happening in a wider context and other people who intersect with your problem, you're able to move above just you as the point of view, to look at all different points of view and gather those together into an insight. And different sources of insights, we often find out that we speak to end users, we speak to people who have never used it, we speak to people who have very strong or very light opinions. Also looking out there, if you're thinking about a brand, looking at what competitors are doing, looking out there in parallel worlds as well, understanding what other people are doing when they're coming to address this issue. So I'm going to I've just lost the slides here. Gives you one moment. We got a question, I think, come through, actually. Is this about continuous improvement? Actually, you can use this process for continuous improvement. It definitely, I'd say they're cousins and they sit alongside each other. So Zach, I think you're going to go through a little bit around when you're interviewing people, what sort of questions you might want to ask them.
Yeah, and I should probably just clarify that there is a wide range of options for gathering insights to understand the landscape that your challenge sits in. It depends on the challenge. There could be some market data that you want to analyze. There could be some particular business insights, for example, customer insights or feedback. But one of the most important methods to uncover insights is the interview. And the interview should be between a wide range of people connected to your challenge, as well as people actually not directly connected to your challenge. There should also be a clear structure to that interview. Now that structure should be both expansive and reductive, meaning it should have broad questions which help to not push the interviewee in a particular direction, but to understand their thought process. There should be narrower questions which really drill deep on particular areas. But we need a structure while we're interviewing people to help us get qualitative data between interviewees. And no surprise, it should cover 4 different areas. It should cover what, how, who, and why. The what is very much what is the problem right now? What is the challenge that people are facing? What is the history? What is the landscape? What are the numbers? The how should be questions around how is the challenge impacting the end user as it stands so far. The who are things like who would be involved in the challenge, who is not involved and could be involved. And the why is very much around why does the problem exist? Where does it stem from? And is there a further problem that we're not seeing? And lots of other questions besides. But by writing out in advance your interview questions, thinking about those 4 areas, you'll come up with a clear structure to interview other people. Now, that doesn't mean it should be a rigid structure. It's absolutely fine to go down rabbit holes when you need to, because that's where you'll get the really great data. Mark, if we could just...
Got a question come in actually from Alan here. I'd just like to respond to. Any tips for keeping those users from generating solutions rather than telling us the problem? Alan, that's a really, really a good question there. And actually, if we're doing this for an organization, we will often bring customers into an idea generation day. We might bring them in with the client, or we might run separate idea generation sessions with the clients. So if you indicate when you're interviewing them that they will be asked later on for their solutions, I find that's an easy way to close them down with them idea generating. However, I have had some people in interviews not refuse to not give me their ideas, and those ideas have turned into a kernel of something we've been able to take forward. So don't look at gift horse in the mouse, but I think actually you're right. You've got a limited time with the people you're interviewing, so you want to make as best use of it as possible. I find by telling them we're going to invite them into an idea generation day, or share the ideas that we generate with them for feedback later on, then they tend to just carry on talking about what their particular problem is. So Zach, you're going to share a little bit about some hints and tips for interviewing, which is great. Yeah. It might help Andy as well.
Yeah, I mean, because we're interviewing people, it can be challenging to get really useful information and then keep a hold of it later on. So we need to make sure we make very detailed notes. If we can, take verbatim quotes from the people you're interviewing. And I would recommend recording interviews so you can refer to verbatim quotes later and not get lost actually making the notes instead of digging down into areas that you should. But of course, you must get permission at the start of the interview to record that interview. Also super important to be structured in the questions. So use the what, how, who, why method if you would like to do that. But again, don't be afraid to go down those rabbit holes because that's where the great quality information lies. Do you remember being a child, or perhaps if you have children now, when you were 5 years old, there was one word which you would use more than any other word in the world, and that is, of course, why. We need to be able to ask why over and over again and use our powers of the English language to make sure that we can do that without making it seem annoying, which I'm sure we can all do. But don't be afraid to keep pushing for more whys, because that's when the truth will come out. And do interview a wide range of stakeholders. Those interviews should be people, as I mentioned before, directly involved, not directly involved. Depending on the challenge you're facing, it could be customers or competitors or ex-employees or a whole range. Be as creative as you can, because they may have expert or even naive expertise on, or a point of view on your challenge, which could then add to the stimulus you're pulling together in order to move to define later on. If only we had some sort of example that would help bring it to life.
Well, we do. Funny you should say that, Zach. So I'm going to talk you through a real project team example. I'm not even going to try and pronounce the medical condition, but it's abbreviated to PKU, which is a medical condition which has a big impact on how people can digest and eat their food. The way it's talked about, you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide there, is in terms of what you can, what you can't eat, different food groups, the impact it has upon you. It's very medicalized, it's very rigid. There is a lot of very difficult and sometimes quite uncomfortable medicine that you have to take as a patient to be able to eat foods, and you have to avoid certain foods. It really is quite a nightmare to navigate your diet. So as a result of that, actually, compliance, particularly with young people, is quite low. So the project group were tasked with the challenge by the pharmaceutical company of how can we increase compliance of the medication. Going out and gathering insights, talking to a wide range of their stakeholders, which included teenagers who were experiencing this condition, their parents, other people who were intersected with the medical providers, etc. There were a number of interviews took place, and a couple of kind of key real insights emerged, and I've got them here on quotes for you. One was around, I just want to be like everyone else. So there was definitely something there about when you're a teenager, the worst thing in the world is being different. That was backed up again about being ill makes me look like the odd kid. And the third, I like to hang out and snack with my mates, and this illness makes it hard. So the insights were around something around that that patient population didn't feel like they could be normal when they hung out with their mates. And when you're a teenager, the worst thing in the world is not to feel normal, not to fit in. And we know also from the insight phase that a lot of kind of the rituals of teenagers hanging out involved food. And we know from the food map there, it's very difficult to eat food if you have PKU without taking a significant amount of medicines, which then makes you look like the odd kid out. So I won't give the game away, but we had to then, or the project team then had to define what the challenge was. So I'm going to hand back to Zach to talk a little bit about defining.
So thanks Mark, we've been expansive in gathering our insights, and there is, you essentially gather as many insights as you can until you feel that you have enough data to move forwards, because now is the moment when we need to move into more of a reductive mode, and that is where we start to pull out the key themes which we think are important to the original challenge question, to uncover what the real needs are. And those uncovering of needs are super important. If we look at the photo on the screen right now, we might directly think that what this person needs perhaps is a book, but it could be maybe they need a ladder. Depending on how creative you're feeling, you might decide to say that they need a pogo stick or a bionic arm. I mean, Henry Ford, well, of course, when he was developing the motor car, what was that quote? If he asked people what they wanted, they said they would need a faster horse.
I think she needs a Kindle.
I think you might be right.
Or she needs information.
She does need information.
Or entertaining.
So it's by getting great insights that we start to then pull out and draw down themes from those insights. Perhaps from the verbatim quotes, we cluster things together to form those themes. And then, Mock, next slide, please. You could then start to convert those themes into challenge questions. So, for example, on the tool you see on the left there, you might have pulled out a particular theme, which you then just flip into a question which starts with the three magical words, how might we, which turns it into something collaborative rather than anything else. And that how might we question should be broad enough that you can have great ideas from it, but narrow enough in its scope so that the ideas are directed towards answering the challenge question. And probably from your insights, you would narrow down and define to perhaps between 3 and 5 particular themes, which you would narrow down again to help you really uncover what the real needs of the challenge are. And almost certainly you'll find that the original challenge question that you were facing isn't the same one that you're looking at now. It's the same direction, but a different angle, because you've uncovered the real need behind the problem. And then when you answer that question, that's when you'll get a really valuable solution.
So I've got an example actually of how creating a clear definition, the process that the project team went through with the PKU Medicine. As you heard, the challenge was, how can we increase compliance? During the insights, I just want to be like everyone else. Being ill makes me look like the odd kid. I like to hang out and snack with my mates. This illness makes it hard. And the theme that was identified by the project team there was called the odd one out. So we reframed that theme into the how might we question, which was how might we make you feel normal when you hang out and snack with your mates? It's much more human-centered. It's much more about the end user. I feel it's much more exciting and springy than just saying, how can we increase compliance? If you feel normal in the context of taking your medicine, then compliance will increase. It will solve the problem that we were given at the initial, or the project team had given at the beginning. However, it is a much clearer definition of the real problem that exists that you need to create a solution for. And that's going to take you through a little bit now around brainstorming and why they do and why they don't work, aren't you, Zach?
Well, I am, Mark, because I've been in a lot of meetings. I've had well over a decade of big global corporate life, and I know what it's like. I've sat in the boardrooms and I've had post-it notes and I've put them up on the walls and they've been brilliant, and I've clustered things together and it's been wonderful. I think I must have been a great person at coming up with ideas. But you know, when I think about it, Mark, nothing really ever happened. I mean, we did those things. We wrote stuff on post-it notes and then we came back to them weeks and months later. And I tried to remember what that particular post-it note meant. And I vaguely remembered, but there was no real action coming out of it. I couldn't really put it all together. And the challenge with that is that it's kind of unstructured. It feels a bit structured, but it's unstructured. We really need to have a clear tool, perhaps, or a clear method to help us come up with great ideas, whether that's alone or with others. But there's a really interesting reason why that's quite unstructured, if we could have the next slide. And that's because there's a big difference between a thought and an idea. You know, we have, if I don't know if you can see my camera now, but we have ideas, in inverted commas, very regularly, but they're not really often useful ideas in that they're really thoughts. A thought is just something which might be good, it might be useful, it's an intention. It's not really something tangible or practical that we could take forwards. An idea is something which is, it's almost like a sort of mini, it's not a prototype, it's like a mini prototype. It's a way of putting on paper something which you could see in your mind being brought to life. So that means when
the thing about an idea is that you can show it to someone who hasn't been in your session and they get it immediately because there's a real call to action behind it. Whereas the thought often is just something that's a sentiment or an observation, like an intention. It's not actionable. And if you think now through brainstorming or sessions or meetings that you've had in the past, we'll have had way more thoughts and ideas. And this was a real, excuse the pun, light bulb moment for me when I learned about the difference between thoughts and ideas. Once that becomes clear, you are much more focused to creating ideas that you can then implement and take action over.
Yeah, and there's three words, Mark, which really help us to come up with great ideas, and that's build in detail. And that building in of detail is really important. So when you do think you have an idea, great. Don't just write down the idea. Start to theorize and write down more about it. It doesn't mean that's the end game, but start to build out if it's a product, for example, packaging, potential price points, distribution channels, and so on, just to help you start to bring it to life in your own mind. Perhaps give it a really funky title so that it pops a little bit, and that will help your thoughts become ideas. But we do have some more tips as well. Sorry, yeah, thoughts become ideas. Good. The first thing is, this is an expansive phase of creative problem solving. Your natural inclination, depending on the way you approach problems, may be to go with pure quality only. Strongly recommend you don't do that. Try to go with quality and quantity together. The more ideas, the better. And the reason for that is, firstly, if you let's say drain your own mind of ideas, once it's drained that you'll start to come up with even more creative ideas as you push yourself even farther. But the other thing is, even in the crazy ideas, even in the wild ideas, you'll find that there's a kernel of something else which will spark something really important and useful to solving the challenge. The other thing is suspending judgment. If you're working in a group, it's really important. Mark mentioned the behavior of signaling earlier. It's really important that you signal to the people you're working with that this is an expansive part of creatively solving problems. And so you cannot or should not judge other people. Every idea is a great idea at this stage. Now, if you are able to come up with ideas with other people, that's probably a good thing because you can bounce off each other. So many minds really do help. And as I mentioned before, building is important. Build on the thought until it becomes an idea, build on the idea and build on the idea until you can really start to see how it would work and how it would add value to the challenge you're facing. I mentioned earlier about extremes, so don't shy away from extremes, but also don't shy away from rational ideas as well. And you'll find that things will fall out of both. Probably go wild first and filter down later. That will help you to release those creative juices. And do feel free to use stimulus and insights. Quite important, not just to just go with blank flip charts. I mean, do look at the world around you to try and stimulate your thinking about coming up with those great ideas. Mark, I don't know if you have any particular example you could share with us.
Strangely enough, I do. So again, going back to this problem that the project team had to deal with for PKU, how can we increase compliance? Defined as how can we make you feel normal when you hang out and snack with your mates? And you talked about the idea of introducing stimulus there, Zach. So the stimulus here was looking at what teenagers consumed with no judgment, but there you'll see people hanging out and having some crisps together or potato chips if you're dialing in from the US, going and eating at McDonald's, having a Red Bull. So we knew that when they were hanging out, there was a lot of snacking going on, and they particularly talked about these 3 snack foods and beverages. And that generated an idea which was called Snack My Meds. And this was taking inspiration from fast food. We create snacks that contain the PKU medicine. The teens can take their medicine without standing out as different from their friends at the same time. They don't have to refrain. If they're all sitting around watching Netflix, they can have their own Doritos, their own version of a hamburger or French fries. So they're not standing out quite so much, and they're fitting in having food with their mates. So that's the process. That was an idea. But what do you do with it? It's on a piece of paper. You've got a lovely pro forma there. What else do you do, Zach? Can you help us?
Well, I can, Mark. It feels like we're TV presenters. So I can, Mark. I mean, the first thing is that actually once you have an idea, or even a cluster of ideas, which forms a bigger idea, that you feel that you can take forwards a little bit, start to push into prototyping so you can bring the idea to life to see if it actually does solve the problem. There's a couple of key things to bear in mind. The first thing is that depending on what you feel about prototyping, you have an idea, you need to test it to make sure it works. In order to test it, you have to bring it to life for the people you want to test it with. Bringing it to life in prototyping is fascinating because if you just nip onto the next slide, there's a wide range of different ways that you can prototype. Prototyping is all about bringing it to life. And that doesn't have to be a polished model. It doesn't have to be something which is a finished product. And one of the key reasons I'm sure you can understand is if you test it and it fails, well, that's good for a start. It means you can reiterate and revisit insights or revisit the defined stage or revisit the idea itself to improve it and make it better and test it again. But if it's what we call a rapid prototype, if it's something which is kind of quick and dirty, but does demonstrate the advantages and benefits of the solution to the end user or stakeholders, then it's going to be something good. Now, we've seen some great prototypes which are brought to life by video. They doesn't need to be completely professionally polished. We've seen some amazing prototypes with cardboard or Lego modeling. In fact, EE regularly cardboard models for their app when they're developing new areas for their app. And they have a cardboard device. They layer on paper after paper. They get people to push buttons, layer it on, and they absolutely test that with end users to make sure that the flows of that app work really, really well. We have seen some amazing storyboarding that goes on in terms of developing a prototype, because that shows the experience in use with the end user. Role-playing can work depending on the environment, CAD modeling, computer-aided design modeling as well. And we've also seen, of course, business model canvas developed by Alex Osterwalder in common use as well. And amongst any others, as you can see there. But it's probably a good idea for us to, it's been a long time since we've had a lot of interaction with you. We should probably do something with the chat function. So if you, oh wait, we could do a poll actually, couldn't we? I think we'll raise a poll and then have a think about which of these methods of prototyping have you actually tried before with success? Would probably be a good angle.
As people are voting there, there's a comment coming from Diana that I really wants to call out, saying we co-create with stakeholders. This often helps us to go to market more rapidly with better solutions. Absolutely. We thoroughly encourage people in their ideation sessions, and even when they're sort of starting to build the prototype, and definitely in test, but include stakeholders. We often, when we're doing a business process or a people innovation, we'll also ask for the stakeholders who are involved to be people who are a little bit more cynical, someone who might potentially reject a solution, so they can then sort of be brought round, be brought into the coven and potentially act as an ambassador for this product or experience or solution when it gets launched out there in the organization.
Just bear in mind, if you're still answering the poll, it is multiple choice if you, of course, use more than one.
Got a good selection of people voted now.
Yeah.
I'll give it another 5 seconds. I do feel like a countdown quizmaster. Great. And then we shall end the poll and share that with you, and you'll be able to see where people, what methods people use for prototyping. So the clear winner there is storyboarding, coming out at 88%. I think people do respond quite positively to seeing something visual. Making a presentation, coming out at 53%, drawing it, 59%, cardboard or Lego modeling, fantastic to see that in there. It's so simple. We were running an innovation boot camp last year in Scotland with a large energy provider, and spent a significant part of the session actually building the solutions in Lego. When you first put Lego in front of a group of executives or leaders, they tend to kind of look at you a bit tentatively, but I tell you, after 10 or 15 minutes, all of that reticence disappears, and they are building merrily and happily with you. Video, 18%. Now, I can see that's quite low, and I have to be honest, initially, when Zach started to introduce video prototyping into our sessions, I had a level of resistance and reticence. But you've had some great, think about the finance company you've been working with when you're training programs. You've had some great experience with video, haven't you, Zach?
Well, that's been great because actually we put severe constraints on them. So it was forced creativity with video. So the most extreme one was based on the prototypes they've been building out in the written word so far. We moved them to actually putting that into video in less than 10 minutes. So there were groups of 6. We asked them in less than 10 minutes to build out a video which they would present Dragon's Den style to a panel of stakeholders. And that 10 minutes just was wonderful. Some of the videos they came up with was amazing, given the constraint. Normally it might be a bit longer than that, perhaps 20 minutes. But with too much time to think, they usually scupper themselves. So it's been great using video.
Great. We've got a couple of comments come in. Andy used software, but no business function behind it. Colin talked about use active rehearsal and improvisation for service and experience. Yeah, absolutely. Get people to go through the actual experience, bringing in actors or members of the organization to role play it. And Andy also talks about 3D printing, particularly looking at some of the interaction between components or component and user. And I've worked with a FMCG company where we were using 3D printing to actually print out what potentially dishwasher tablets might look like in the future. So great, some real interesting and varied methodologies. I would just encourage you to really think about trialing video as a prototype. There's some very easy software online now if you want to edit it. But people are quite forgiving in video, and it's a really exciting medium to share your prototype.
Great. I just got a super quick note on who you're actually going to share your prototype with while you're testing it. I mean, just be really clear that it's not just the end users. Try to map out as many people as possible. A bit like when we were gathering insights. It was really important to get insights from a range of people directly, but also indirectly involved. Can't stress enough the importance of testing your prototype with people not involved. For example, it might be non-customers or naive people, naive experts, let's say, who don't know about the area you're ideating and creatively problem solving around. Mark.
So I'd like to bring the project team solution or prototype solution forward for PKU. As you saw, how can we increase compliance is what the client asked the project team, which was defined as how can we make you feel normal when you hang out and snack with your mates. The idea there, which was that snack my meds. And then here, just two little examples there, taking a simple picture of a box of oven microwave chips and creating them as a kind of a PKU version, and then taking inspiration from the sort of Red Bull energy drinks and creating a PKU version. So you'll see that you could put those in front of an end user or a procurement team or a marketing team or a buying team and start to say, what are your views on this? What do you think about it? Because it's really important when you put your prototype forward, as Zach is going to explain in the next slide, that you have a real clear sense of what you want to get out of it. What can you demonstrate by your prototype?
Absolutely. And depending on your thinking preference, the way that you innovate will change depending on the way you see the world, as we saw earlier with the half of 13 exercise. It's really important you try and push yourself to demonstrate a range of values in different areas to the people to whom you're presenting. So it could be a lot of facts and figures. Can you articulate the landscape, the facts, the figures, the ROI? Can you demonstrate a return on investment from it? What actually is the plan to drive it forwards to prototype and test and beyond to launch? How are you going to engage all the stakeholders that are involved and the end users as well? And actually, how can you demonstrate the value behind the solution? Once you can do all that clearly in your prototype, then you ask for a call to action, whether it's about giving clear feedback or whether it's about asking for funding and so on.
So when you are taking this prototype out, you'll need to test it with all of those stakeholders and end users before you can then get it into scaling it out. And we take our learning here from Lean Startup, from the startup world, where you build your prototype, you go out and you measure people's responses to it, you learn from that, iterate it in response to that, no egos required here, rebuild your new prototype, again, go out and test it with your end users and stakeholders, learn what's working, what isn't working, what can you take out, what do you need to turn the volume up on, and then build another prototype. So this is a continual virtuous loop that you'll need for testing, and those individuals, particularly in the startup world, are excellent at doing that.
So we have this 5-step methodology for creative problem solving. If you skip out steps, you will skip out some of the quality behind the process. That first stage, which is expansive, discover, really important to come up with a broad range of insights before you narrow down and define, to pull out the really keys and themes, which you'll then go on to solve in an expansive way with ideate. You test the idea, of course, to make sure it works, and then you move on to scale.
So I'm interested to find out actually whether there is anybody who's willing to share with us what problem they might use creative problem solving with or for. Do they have something in mind that they think, right, there's a methodology here, the 5+1 methodology. What might I take this and use it for? If you want to maybe pop a couple of comments in the chat, I'll be interested to see how you'll go about applying what you've learned today, or how you might apply it either to your personal life, to the problems we're going through with COVID-19, or to your professional life. So Jane's talking about creating a recovery curriculum for children and families, community and staff. Absolutely. And Jane, we might send you through after this actually our pathway through uncertainty, which talks about the stages that we'll all go through. The 3rd stage is return and the 4th stage is renew. So we'll make sure that we get that for you, Jane. Temi, developing a new product for our social enterprise. Fantastic. We'd love to hear how that goes. Miriam, adoption of our new technology framework is slow, absolutely, and people reluctant to accept the new process. So I bet there's some real insights that you could gather to define what the real problem is, to come up with a solution we should then be able to prototype and test. And Jules, new career ambitions. Well, great. Thank you very much. I hope we can help. And Andy, to make my creations more relevant to the world rather than just being fun. Well, hopefully you've learned some stuff from us this morning. As I said, we exist to accelerate potential of individuals, leaders, and organizations. Hopefully we've accelerated some of your potential. If you want to find out more and to maybe delve in a little more detail about this, there's a little video that follows. Hello, I'm Mock O'Keefe, founder of the Innovation Beehive. Thank you for joining this online creative problem-solving course.
Join the creative problem-solving course today to accelerate your potential.
Great. And as Joe said, if you'd like to learn more and to go into more detail and to accelerate your own potential, we have created an online creative problem-solving course. All you need to do, if you'd like to sign up for that, is to scan the QR code that's located on the right-hand side of your PowerPoint now. You just literally open your photo on your iPhone, put it towards the QR code, and you'll be able to join. And we're offering a special through end of April, beginning of May, introductory discount of £50. It's £49.50. And the course has got expert tuitions, real world examples, and is bursting with content. We'll also send you the link after today. Hopefully we'll see you online. We'd love you to delve in more into this and to help solve the problems. But thank you so much for joining us. If you have any more questions or need anything else from us, just email us at hello@innovationbeehive.com. We hope to see you online. And thanks so much for your time. Go forth and innovate.